Hi, everybody. Charles from GMAT Ninja here. Today, we're going to answer the question, just how screwed is your round 3 MBA application? Here to discuss this, two of my very, very favorite people in the admissions consulting world. So we've got Donna Bauman, senior MBA counselor at Stratus Admissions, and Susan Cera, who's the director of MBA Admissions at Stratus. Thank you both for doing this with me.
Glad to be here. Yeah.
Okay, let's jump right into the question, because we get people all the time this time of year going, all right, I want to apply in round 3. What are my odds? So I'd like to answer that question. And quick thing before we jump into that, anybody wondering, we're using round 3 as a proxy for round 3, round 4, anything that comes after that. There are MBA programs out there who have rolling admissions that might go straight through the summer. So when we say round 3, what we really mean is round 3, round 4, anything after that. So your spring and summer applications. And we're also focused exclusively on US admissions here because the whole system works differently in a lot of other parts of the world. So Susan, let me direct this to you. So if you're applying to US programs, round 3, round 4, beyond that, how do you think about your odds? How screwed are you? Is it worth bothering? Are your odds good? Are they terrible? How would you think about all that?
So at the end of the day, it's really a crapshoot. Interestingly, about 3 or 4 years ago, HPS eliminated their round 3, which gives a nod to exactly how competitive it is. Keep in mind, though, that for HBS, probably 85 or 90 out of 100 people admitted will go there. So they have enough applicants who are outstanding coming out of round 1 and round 2 that they can just play to their wait list in round 3. No round 3 at all. But for other schools, there still is some wiggle room, but in any given year, we don't know what it looks like. We don't know how their yield is coming through. You know, at this time of year, deposits are just due now. We're recording in February. The round 1 people who found out in December that they had gotten in have just come through their admitted students weekends and are putting in their deposits. Interviews are going on in real time for round 2. We have no idea. The schools even right now have no idea where they're going to be come April, May, June. It really just is a crapshoot. And there are also macro factors that change from year to year. In some years, it's COVID, and all of a sudden people can't get visas, and that opens up a whole bunch of seats. Or in some years, there are big layoffs that happened. A year ago, it was a number of tech layoffs, and the schools were really looking to these people as, hey, maybe you'd like to go to business school rather than finding a new job. That opened the door for a universe of people in round 3. But in any given year, we really just don't know. Chances are much stronger for you in either round 1 or round 2 than kind of April and beyond.
So if I'm hearing you right, Susan, you're saying worst case scenario, if schools have admitted a bunch of students, they always admit plenty of students round 1, round 2. If those students say yes, and the industry term for that is yield. So if the schools have a high yield, meaning a lot of their admitted students decide to accept their slots, then you might apply in round 3 and there are very, very few, if any, slots available. Other side of it might be, hey, a bunch of students decline their slots and all of a sudden plenty of openings in round 3.
Yep. Great summary.
Awesome. Donna, let me go to you. So what else might drive? So, you know, we get students all the time going, hey, round 3, I want a scholarship. And they're kind of thinking of it as equal to round 1. When it comes to things like scholarships, is it equal? I guess what other differences might you highlight between a round 3 application and round 1, round 2?
Right. So with scholarships, I mean, they're sort of, released, offered to people as they go. And so obviously a lot of scholarships in round 1, they usually do keep definitely, some available for round 2. But again, you now have lost the controllables because you don't know what's happening. People may have accepted more scholarships actually than they thought, and so now they're in a real deficit where they're really scrambling because every year the schools are also sort of trying to hit moving targets, and they might have oversubscribed, and then all of a sudden there's just really no money no matter what. So if scholarships is super important, you're going to have the best odds if you kind of are in that first pool where all the money is available for a given year. So that's definitely something that perhaps people don't think about or just don't realize that piece of it exists. So,
and I guess, is there a certain profile of student or a certain profile of applicant that you see being more successful in round 3, or that you would look at their situation and say, hey, it's worth a shot in round 3?
Yeah, I would say, sometimes there are people that have just had nose down, maybe working on a really tough project and have some great stories to tell in terms of accomplishments, and kind of realizing maybe in January, February, gee, I think I'd like to go ahead and get an application in. And if they're, all their test scores are good and their work experience is great and they have that good relationship where the recommenders, that you do need to make sure that your recommenders have enough time. So you can't just spring this on someone, oh, I'm applying next week, and expect that your recommender is going to be able to do the same kind of job that someone would have done if they had more notice. But we've definitely seen candidates who have made strong application and been successful. And, if you can save a year of your life, if you're at the inflection point where right now you want to go forward, then it can work out very well.
Susan?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that there is someone I was working with who was at an early stage company, and the company found itself in early part of the year in a situation where he had an exit, and that exit was going to happen before September. And if he didn't take advantage of that window of opportunity, then, waiting another year, he'd have to find another job. Similar to a layoff, but he was heads down working towards this exit for a startup. And the timing is absolutely perfect for round 3. And having been a co-founder of a startup and having great experience for very targeted programs, this individual is a wonderful fit and a wonderful person to find a seat in round 3 based on the experiences they would bring to the table.
And that reminds me kind of another person I worked with last year, where we were kind of plodding along, and she had her GMAT score at that time all through was like at in the low 600, in that range, and all of a sudden through diligence and grit and all of that, she had the breakthrough where now her test score jumped up into the 730 range, and that just opened up a whole new range of possibilities. And so she kind of went ahead and applied in round 3 to Kellogg and Yale, I think maybe a few other schools, and was successful in both of those, where that effort might not have been worth it, if she had been applying on that old test score. So if you find yourself suddenly with, a breakthrough test score, or perhaps, a breakthrough promotion, or some kind of something that really, is breaking news that you want to capitalize on, it can work to your advantage to go ahead and get into round 3 and apply.
So I think I'm hearing from you too is that, okay, so we have the situation with round 3 and beyond, where at that moment when you apply in the spring, you're going, yeah, I don't know if your odds are great or terrible. There might be tons of slots, not very many slots. I think you're describing clients who are in a situation where their life circumstances point them towards a round 3 application. Something's changed, had an exit from the startup, their application changed. Do you think it's the case that schools are looking at those applications and going, hey, wait a minute, we're seeing why you waited. It makes sense that you're applying now in the spring versus round 1, round 2, because something changed for you. And when that's the case, when something is materially changed in terms of that candidacy, do you think that schools that the schools become more receptive to the candidacy as a result?
I think so, because one of the questions that's often asked is not just, why do you want an MBA, but why now? And sometimes that personal situation of why now is a change that was perhaps unexpected. And, you didn't know 6 months ago where you were going to be today. And you thought you were going to apply this fall, but now it makes more sense to apply and be sitting in a class in the fall. Right. And things change. And maybe it's something that was outside of your control, and you want to take advantage of that situation if it's appropriate.
Yeah. But I think still it does. And we don't know this, but again, it could just still be that it's a great candidate. But if a school is oversubscribed or finding that their yield is, stronger than they thought, then that does, I think, sometimes break their heart that we wish we had a spot for you, but we don't. And then that could be a situation where you are going to get that wink, wink, apply in round 1, because we really would love to have you, but we just simply don't have a spot. So that could get you, on the radar and on the fast track for next year if you've really made a great impression, and it simply is just that there truly is no more room in the inn this year. So.
And in a moment, I'd love to circle back to that type of situation where you're a strong candidate, the school recognizes it, they really don't have the space, get rejected in round 3, then you're reapplying in round 1. We'll circle back to that in a second, and that decision of should you apply in round 3 or round 1. Before we get there, I want to pick on the international students for just a moment. So there's a whole lot of babble out there on the internet that says, oh, as you get to these later applications, maybe it's a problem if you're international, maybe it's not. So could you two say something about if you're an international applicant to the US, you're going to need a student visa. Should you apply in round 3? Should you avoid it like the plague? How should you think about that?
If you look at the websites of a lot of schools and the admissions, and they usually fall short of saying you cannot, although there are a few schools that say we will not accept round 3 admissions for internationals. They'll sometimes have a star. International students have to apply by this date. But some others will just kind of leave that open and say that they will, they'll allow it. And we were talking, Kellogg or schools that have later start dates, there's a little bit longer runway. So it may be that it's easier for a student to get that visa to clear when you're starting September 20th versus starting August 15th. So that could be a school by school. When does the school start? But it's a lot of time and effort for, international students. And it's like, if you really want to, I generally will recommend that people go ahead and wait and be early. And that kind of reminds me of a guy I worked with about this time last year that came in and was wanting to talk about US schools in February. And I was like, we can try to rush, but why don't you just slow down, take a few months, and let's be ahead of this. And he ended up, really cleaning up and getting all kinds of round 1 applications and acceptances, and even a scholarship, which is sometimes challenging for international students to get. So I think it worked out really well for him, sitting on 5 top, several M7 schools and top programs, acceptances and scholarships, to have just waited a few more months and done it sort of not from, and having more control over things.
So what I'm hearing is that if you're an international student trying to apply in round 3, that door is not shut on you, but you're starting to deal with a whole bunch more uncertainty because, again, the US visa process can be a mess. It can take a long time. Some schools explicitly frown on those late applications. Others will do their best to work with you if you are admitted to get that visa, but you might really be cutting it close in the end. And I think bottom line, it sounds like, is if you're an international applicant and you can afford to wait until the next cycle, you're probably better off in round 1 than in round 3.
Yeah. And, and also sometimes when you think about international students and just the complications around finding housing and just kind of wanting to fit in, and now you have people that are in these Slack chat groups for a couple months, they might already be best friends and gone on, ski vacations together in the class, and you're coming in, at the 11th hour, scrambling to even, figure out where you're living. And it can make what is already, a very like drinking from the fire hose experience even more, because now you're just like, all of a sudden everything's got to happen in 3 weeks. So.
All right. So let's talk about the poor folks who decide to apply in round 3. And again, sometimes, good things can happen in round 3. It's just, it's really, really hard to predict them ahead of time. I'll have plenty of stories of folks who got into great schools round 3. It can happen. It's just in some years, great applications are going to get rejected pretty much right away. So the folks who apply in round 3 decide to take their shot, get rejected, maybe through no fault of their own, classes are full. Tell us a little bit about how tough is that process as you start to switch over to round 1 and you're reapplying. Your story's the same story. It's only been 4 months, 6 months, something like that. Not very much time has passed. What's that like? Does that put you at a disadvantage as an applicant? What can you do to maximize your odds? Is it something that you really want to avoid? So Susan, tell us a little bit more about all that.
So, I've seen people who've come to me having applied on their own in round 3 and struck out. And when they come to me for round 1, I look at what they've submitted and I go, oof, you've got a really good story to tell, but these applications you submitted do not tell that. And I can totally help them tell the story in a way that's going to resonate with admissions committee. Now, if you put forward all your best effort, controlled everything in your control, worked with a consultant, and had the very best story, in round 3, it's sometimes hard to move that needle for round 1. And depending on the school, you may be okay. Some schools look for, give the opportunity to write an additional essay on a reapplicant essay. And maybe you can say that you spent the summer, you're in New York City, and you met with every single intern from their school who was in New York City. And now you are more enthusiastic than ever to attend their program. And so just showing that love can sometimes move the needle, even when your story hasn't changed at all, or your test score hasn't changed at all. So it's not the end of the world, but if you are going to put your best foot forward in round 3, that means not only having the best test score and work experience, but also telling us your story in a way that makes sense as to why now is that the time that you're applying and why it's important for you to be in school that September. It's doable. I've had plenty of people that have come to me as reapplicants, and for the most part, they find success when they did it on their own the previous year, and there was something that they missed that I can help them to improve.
And Donna, since you've worked on admissions committees before getting into working as an admissions counselor, I guess the really dumb question for anybody wondering, how are reapplicants viewed in general? Is that a positive if you say the same candidate again? And if you're on that admissions committee, are you typically looking back at their previous application as well, or do you start fresh?
Yeah. So one of the things that I didn't think about this until I was on the admissions side, but because I think as a human, you get rejected from a school, you kind of feel like, oh, there's big X, like this school is never, go away. And that's really not the case. And you can't take these decisions personally, because they're not personal. And especially if it was a round 3 decision, you may not have even had a full fair shake because they just didn't have any spots left. So the schools actually respect, and we respected, like, wow, this person they're so interested in this school, they're willing to roll up their sleeves and do it again. And so, that actually is positive. And that it's a way to demonstrate interest in the school. Like, I'm willing to do this again. So that mindset shift that anybody's watching, like, have that, realize, no, you're not like, damaged goods trying to, show yourself again the next year. It's like, no, you're showing actually a positive that you really want this program so much that you're willing to do it again. And so that's a real important mindset shift to have. And I think that confidence in I want to tell you more what I've learned in doing more research. And so, that application that you resubmit, even if your story probably should not be making some kind of drastic change. Let's just say if you applied in 3 years and every year you have a totally different goal, totally different thing, that is a red flag. But it's not that your story's changed, but you have a refresh. You've learned more. You've maybe, subjected yourself to more test prep, or taken a course that's going to show that you have more, quantitative abilities, and you're showing it in a different way. But know that the schools want to accept you, and that there's no shame in that. And I think I remember reading at one point, Harvard's class has usually about 10% of the class is reapplicants. So you're in good company there, and you should not feel bad. And the schools are going to give you a fair shake. If you do that, I do remember, a lot of schools will have access to your last year's application. They should, depending on what kind of blocks the school puts on, if they decide not to look at it. But I think in practice, most schools, the admissions people can see it. And if you didn't do anything different, you didn't, it's kind of like, I didn't have, you have to put a little effort in and show some insight and growth. So while the whole application doesn't have to be radically different, it should be refreshed and nuanced and show further growth and thinking.
And
I'll just add one thing to that is, in any given year, I'm always telling people, there are only so many seats in every class at every one of these top MBA programs. And in any given year, there are way more well-qualified applicants who could sit in those seats. Now, applying in round 3, many of the seats are already taken. Right. When you reapply in round 1, the class is empty and every seat is open to be taken. So just because you didn't find success in round 3 doesn't mean that there's not a seat for you in round one. There were times when I was on an admissions committee where I'd read something in round three and be like, oh God, this person's amazing. How can we, when we can't go wink, wink, nudge, nudge, apply next year, how do we communicate to them that we really like them? And sometimes we would put them on a wait list just to be like, we like you and you're going to sit on the wait list through July because we want you to come back next year in round one. And that was kind of our best way without being able to whisper in their ear, please come back next year.
Yeah.
To get that message to them.
Yeah.
I love it. Good.
I just had a thought about if you in the round one, if there is a school, there's a couple of, we'll call them specials, if you will, and a few schools, Columbia took away that sort of early decision option where you could just let them know right up front, we want you. But Fuqua still has an early decision. Keenan-Flagler still has an early decision. Tuck, if you apply early enough, and actually to their credit in both rounds, if you apply in the early part of their rounds, they at least up to this year, they guaranteed you an interview. So there are some things by being that early mover, you can give yourself, make it a little easier to kind of be in that set where they're really saying, these are the people that really are super excited. So we're going to kind of give them an extra look.
And Donna, say more about, just to be really explicit, when you say early decision, what exactly do you mean? And very few schools have it, a handful do.
Right.
But how is that an advantage in communicating your interest? What does it mean?
It's set up to be as binding, although I do not think there's a way that they sort of hold you to it, perhaps in the same way that undergraduate, early decision is. But it's a choice that you should be thoughtfully making. And for example, if you say Fuqua is, the school I really want to be at, you can usually apply. It's a month earlier than what the normal round one is. And in that pool, you're saying, I'm signaling to you in applying, this is where I want to be. And if I'm accepted, I'm coming, and done, and that is something that, there's going to be fewer people in that set and you're going to get a little bit more attention. Darden does something a little bit like that, but they give you there's an early, you can apply early, but you can also say non-binding. So you're signaling, yes, I want to apply as early as I can, but I'm not binding, versus I am applying in the earliest and I do want that to be binding. And those people are getting decisions, earlier and depositing, and, for what it's designed for, it's a way for you to say to the school, hey, this is really where I want to be. And I'm showing you by applying early. And, I think generally could be increasing your odds of being accepted.
Okay, before we wrap up, I worry that we're being a little bit scary about round three. And I think our bottom line is, hey, if you face that choice between round three versus round one, round three, you're just dealing with uncertainty, a bunch of things beyond your control. Maybe that class is full. Maybe it isn't and your odds are great, but you're not going to know until after you get your offer or your rejection. For most people, you're pursuing a scholarship, you're an international student. Round one is going to be the safer bet. That said, there's still a reason round three exists. Great candidates get admitted all the time. I guess as we wrap up, who are the candidates who you think really should be applying in round three? Under what circumstances is that a really, really good idea for somebody despite the uncertainty? And Susan, I'll go to you and then finish up with Donna.
Yeah, so the people who should be applying in round one, or round three rather, are people who are just that diamond in the rough. Someone who's a little bit different and, is going to add some spice to the program. Typically you're not going to be finding, an investment banker or consultant applying in round three. Unless something went sideways for them. It's going to be the person from, Teach for America who over Christmas went home and met a friend who's in business school, who's like, oh my God, you should do this. And they're like, what is this? What is business school? And I'm done with my teaching stuff in my commitment in June. Wow. This is a great next step for me. That might be the person, someone really unique who's going to bring a different perspective to the classroom and maybe is not on a traditional path to business school.
Right. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And, there could be considerations where someone might have had something in their personal life, perhaps a health challenge or some kind of challenge that, that came up, and now round, this is the time. So, the best time to apply really in any round is when you are ready and when you have all your material together and you've done the homework. And maybe the way to soften this for people is, you're not going to get into a program if you don't apply. That's for sure. So anytime you apply is a good time to apply, and that nothing is permanent. So if for some reason it doesn't go, really, I hope we shared no harm, no foul. It's not like you're on some bad list. You try again the next year, and there's no harm in that. And you have gained insight about the process and what you need to do. And, you've done a lot of that thinking so that, it's probably going to be a little bit easier for you in round one because you a little bit know what to expect. So no bad choices.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you both for doing this. Everybody watching again, Donna Bauman, Stratus Admissions, Susan Cera, Director of MBA Admissions at Stratus. You need help with your applications, two of my very favorite people. You have questions about them, email us at GMAT Ninja. Seriously, I'll be totally honest, tell you everything you could possibly want to know about these two. All right, that's it for today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next time.